In quiet hospital rooms, on silent operating tables, and in moments where the human body appears to fail completely, something extraordinary has been reported again and again. Across cultures, religions, and centuries, people who were clinically dead, or extremely close to it, have returned with stories that challenge everything we think we know about life and death. These accounts do not come from mystics alone, but from surgeons, pilots, scientists, children, and ordinary individuals with nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking out. One of the most unsettling pieces of evidence comes from near-death experiences. Thousands of people who were declared clinically dead describe leaving their bodies and observing events with startling accuracy. They recount conversations between doctors, the specific placement of medical instruments, even details, in rooms they could not physically see. In several documented cases, these observations were later verified by medical staff, raising the question of how awareness could exist without a functioning brain. Another striking pattern is the experience of a tunnel and an intense non-physical light. This light is not described as blinding, but as deeply intelligent and overwhelmingly loving. People often say it communicates without words, conveying understanding instantly. What makes this remarkable is the consistency. People from different countries, belief systems, and ages describe the same phenomenon, even when they had never heard of such experiences before. Children provide some of the most compelling testimonies. Young children who suffer clinical death and are revived often describe encounters with deceased relatives they never met or were never told about. Later, families confirm the identities through details the child could not have known. Because children are less influenced by cultural or religious expectations, their accounts are especially difficult to dismiss. There are also cases of terminal lucidity, where patients with severe brain damage or advanced dementia suddenly regain full clarity shortly before death. Individuals who had not spoken or recognized loved ones for years become coherent, emotionally present, and intellectually sharp. If consciousness were solely produced by the brain, such sudden clarity should be impossible, yet it happens often enough to be documented in medical literature. Reincarnation research adds another layer to the mystery. Children between the ages of 2 and 5 sometimes speak vividly about previous lives, including names, locations, professions, and circumstances of death. In many cases, investigators have traced these statements to real, deceased individuals whose lives closely match the child's descriptions. Birthmarks and physical traits sometimes correspond to injuries or marks from the previous personality, suggesting a continuity that transcends one lifetime. Another line of evidence comes from shared death experiences. Sometimes, people at the bedside of a dying individual report witnessing the same phenomena as the person who is passing: visions of light, a sense of presence, or even seeing the dying person appear to leave the body. These shared experiences occur even when the witnesses are healthy and not under stress or medication, implying something external rather than hallucinatory. Modern neuroscience struggles to explain these events. During cardiac arrest, brain activity drops sharply, often reaching levels incompatible with conscious experience. Yet this is precisely when the most vivid and structured experiences are reported. Some patients describe enhanced clarity, faster thinking, and deeper understanding during moments when the brain should be incapable of producing such states. There are also reports of people encountering environments more real than ordinary reality. Colors are described as richer, emotions as purer, and perception as sharper than anything experienced in physical life. Many say that returning to the body feels limiting, as if consciousness is being compressed into something far smaller than its natural state. Life reviews are another frequently reported phenomenon. Individuals describe seeing their entire life unfold instantaneously, not only from their own perspective, but from the perspective of others they affected. They report feeling the emotions they caused in others, both positive and negative, without judgment, but with profound clarity. This experience often leads to deep personality changes after revival, including increased empathy, reduced fear of death, and a stronger sense of purpose. Some of the most controversial evidence comes from veridical perception studies. Researchers have placed hidden images or symbols in operating rooms, visible only from above, A small but significant number of near-death experiencers have accurately described these images. After being revived, despite having no physical way of seeing them, challenging material explanations, cultural differences also reveal something unexpected. While the imagery of the afterlife varies, different landscapes, symbols, or beings, the core elements remain strikingly similar: separation from the body, heightened awareness, a sense of continuity, and an encounter with something greater than the self. This suggests that the experience may be filtered through culture rather than created by it. Skeptics often point to hallucinations or oxygen deprivation, yet these explanations fall short. Hallucinations are typically chaotic, fragmented, and quickly forgotten. Near-death experiences, by contrast, are structured, meaningful, and remembered in extraordinary detail for decades. Oxygen deprivation usually causes confusion and panic, not clarity and peace. People who have had these experiences rarely seek fame or profit. Many hesitate to share their stories for fear of ridicule. Yet when they do speak, their lives often change dramatically. Material success becomes less important, compassion increases, and the fear of death fades. These transformations are long-lasting, suggesting something deeply real was encountered. Historical records echo modern accounts. Ancient texts from Egypt, Greece, India, and indigenous cultures describe journeys of the soul, judgment after death, and continued existence beyond the physical body. These descriptions were written long before modern medicine, yet they mirror contemporary reports with uncanny precision. Finally, the most profound proof may lie in the question science cannot yet answer: why consciousness exists at all. No phys. Eichel process fully explains subjective experience, self-awareness, or the sense of I. If consciousness were merely a byproduct of the brain, it should vanish completely at death. Instead, evidence increasingly suggests that the brain may act more like a receiver than a generator, tuning into a consciousness that exists independently. Taken together, these 15 lines of evidence do not offer simple comfort or easy answers. They challenge the idea that death is an end, that identity is temporary, and that existence is limited to what can be measured. They point toward a reality where consciousness continues, observes, remembers, and perhaps even returns, existing beyond the fragile boundary we call life. For centuries, the dominant assumption has been that consciousness is nothing more than a byproduct of brain activity, an emergent function of neurons firing in complex patterns. According to this view, when the brain shuts down, awareness should vanish completely. Yet a growing body of evidence challenges this assumption, suggesting that consciousness may exist independently of the physical brain and continue even when the brain is no longer functioning in any measurable way. Some of the most compelling evidence comes from near-death experiences that occur during periods of clinical death. In these moments, the heart has stopped, breathing has ceased, and brain activity is either severely diminished or entirely absent. Under such conditions, conventional neuroscience predicts confusion, unconsciousness, or nothing at all. Instead, many individuals report vivid, structured, and deeply coherent experiences. They describe a sense of awareness that is not only intact but heightened, with thoughts that feel clearer and more expansive than those experienced in normal waking life. What makes these reports especially difficult to dismiss is their consistency and detail. People often describe leaving their physical bodies and observing the surrounding environment from an elevated perspective. They report seeing doctors working on them, hearing conversations, and noticing specific actions or objects in the room. In numerous documented cases, these observations were later confirmed by medical staff, even when the individual was unconscious or clinically dead at the time. If consciousness were entirely dependent on the brain, such accurate perception without sensory input should be impossible. Further complicating the materialist explanation is the timing of these experiences. Brain scans and electroencephalograms show that during cardiac arrest, measurable brain activity rapidly collapses. Within seconds, the brain enters a state incompatible with conscious thought. Yet many near-death experiences are reported as occurring precisely during this window, not before the loss of consciousness or after revival, but during the period when the brain should be incapable of producing any experience at all. Attempts to explain these phenomena as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, medication, or stress fail to account for their structure and clarity. Hallucinations are typically fragmented, distorted, and short-lived. They often lack narrative coherence and are quickly forgotten. Near-death experiences, by contrast, are remembered with remarkable clarity for decades. People recall them as more real than dreams, often stating that ordinary life feels comparatively dull or muted afterward. Another challenge to the brain-only model of consciousness comes from cases involving blind individuals. People who were blind from birth have reported visual perceptions during near-death experiences, describing shapes, colors, and spatial relationships they had never encountered in physical life. These descriptions are not vague metaphors, but detailed visual accounts that align with real-world objects and environments. If visual imagery requires prior sensory experience and functioning visual cortex activity, such reports should not exist. Research into veridical perception strengthens this argument further. In controlled studies, hidden targets were placed in locations only visible from above, such as on top of shelves or medical equipment. A small but significant number of individuals who reported out-of-body experiences during resuscitation accurately described these targets. While not every case succeeds, even a few verified instances challenge the idea that consciousness is confined to the brain and sensory organs. There is also the phenomenon of heightened cognition during near-death experiences. Many individuals report rapid, expansive thinking, instant understanding, and access to information beyond their normal mental capacity. They describe a sense of being more themselves than ever before, as if the limitations imposed by the physical brain have been lifted. This runs counter to the expectation that a failing brain should produce diminished or chaotic mental states. Beyond near-death experiences, other medical phenomena point in the same direction. Terminal lucidity presents a particularly striking example. In individuals with advanced Alzheimer's disease, brain tumors, or severe neurological damage sometimes regain full mental clarity shortly before death. They recognize loved ones, engage in meaningful conversations, and display cognitive abilities that had been absent for years. These moments occur without any corresponding physical improvement in the brain, suggesting that awareness may not be entirely dependent on neural integrity. Studies of anesthesia awareness add another layer to the mystery. Some patients report conscious experiences and accurate perceptions during deep anesthesia, a state in which the brain should be fully suppressed. While rare, these cases raise questions about how awareness can persist when neural activity is pharmacologically blocked. Philosophically, the problem of consciousness remains unresolved. No physical explanation fully accounts for subjective experience, the sense of self, or the feeling of being an observer. Neural correlates can be mapped, but correlation does not equal causation. Just as a radio does not create music but receives it, the brain may function as an interface rather than the source of consciousness itself. Damage to the radio affects reception, not the existence of the signal. This model offers a coherent explanation for why consciousness appears to persist when the brain shuts down. If the brain is a filter or receiver, then near-death experiences could represent moments when that filter is loosened or bypassed. Awareness may expand rather than diminish, explaining the reported clarity, intensity, and sense of continuity beyond the physical body. Skepticism remains strong, as it should in any serious inquiry. Yet skepticism alone does not resolve the accumulating anomalies. When a theory repeatedly fails to explain observed data, it must either be revised or replaced. The growing number of well-documented cases suggests that the brain-only model of consciousness may be incomplete. Importantly, many of those who report these experiences do not interpret them through religious doctrine. Some were atheists or skeptics before their experiences and struggled afterward to reconcile what they encountered with their previous worldview. Their accounts often lack dogma and instead focus on awareness, perception, and continuity, making them difficult to dismiss as belief-driven fantasies. Long-term follow-up studies show that these individuals exhibit consistent psychological changes. They lose their fear of death, develop a stronger sense of meaning, and often describe a lasting awareness that consciousness is not confined to the body. These changes persist for decades. Unlike the fleeting effects of hallucinations or dreams, taken together, these findings suggest a profound possibility. Consciousness may be a fundamental aspect of reality rather than a temporary byproduct of biological processes. The brain may shape, limit, and express consciousness, but not create it. When the brain fails, something appears to continue observing, remembering, and experiencing, operating by rules that science has only begun to glimpse, leaving open the possibility that awareness does not end when the body stops, but simply changes its state, continuing beyond physical boundaries, unconfined by neurons, time, or matter. When accounts of extraordinary experiences surrounding death first began to surface, they were often dismissed as products of culture, religion, or imagination. It seemed reasonable to assume that people would describe what they had been taught to expect. Yet, as reports accumulated from different parts of the world, a troubling pattern emerged. Despite vast differences in language, belief systems, and cultural traditions, the core elements of these experiences remained strikingly consistent, suggesting that something deeper than conditioning might be at work. People from remote villages, modern cities, deeply religious societies, and secular environments describe the same foundational sequence of events. There is a moment of separation from the physical body, often accompanied by the sensation of floating or rising. This is followed by an acute awareness of the surrounding environment, frequently with sharper perception than in ordinary life. Many report moving through a tunnel or transitional space toward an intense light that radiates intelligence, warmth, and familiarity. The consistency of this progression appears again and again, regardless of cultural background. What makes this especially compelling is that these similarities persist even when individuals have no prior exposure to stories of near-death experiences. In isolated regions where such concepts are not discussed or recorded, people still describe the same sensations and perceptions. Their language may differ, their symbols may vary, but the structure of the experience remains remarkably aligned with accounts from completely different societies. Children offer particularly powerful evidence. Young children who come close to death often report these experiences spontaneously, without prompting and without religious framing. They speak of leaving their bodies, meeting non-physical beings, or encountering a loving presence, using simple and direct language. Because children lack the cultural reinforcement and expectation that adults carry, their accounts are difficult to explain as learned narratives or social imitation. Studies comparing near-death experiences across cultures reveal that while surface imagery adapts to cultural context, the underlying elements do not. A person from one culture may describe a river, another a tunnel, and another a doorway, yet all refer to a transitional boundary between physical life and something beyond it. The forms differ, but the function is the same, suggesting a universal process interpreted through familiar symbols. The presence of deceased relatives or known figures also appears consistently, but with a crucial detail. People often encounter individuals they did not know had died or relatives they were never told about. Later confirmation of these deaths adds weight to the argument that these experiences are not purely constructed from memory or expectation. Even in cultures with no strong belief in an afterlife, these encounters still occur. Another shared element is the profound sense of peace and absence of pain. People who were severely injured or in extreme distress report that the moment of separation brings relief rather than fear. This emotional shift appears across age groups and belief systems, contradicting the idea that the experience is shaped by fear-based or hope-driven expectations. Life reviews also show cross-cultural consistency. Individuals describe a rapid yet detailed replay of their lives, often experienced from multiple perspectives. They report feeling the emotional impact of their actions on others, not as punishment or reward, but as direct understanding. While the moral frameworks of cultures differ, The experiential focus on empathy and interconnectedness remains the same. Skeptics often argue that these similarities arise from shared human neurology. Yet, neurological explanations struggle to account for why the same patterns emerge regardless of cultural storytelling. Dreams, hallucinations, and fantasies vary widely between societies, reflecting personal and cultural symbolism. Near-death experiences, however, show a level of uniformity that sets them apart from typical brain-generated imagery. Language barriers further highlight this phenomenon. People who have never interacted, who speak different languages and live under vastly different conditions, use strikingly similar descriptions when translated. Phrases such as more real than real, timeless, and completely aware appear again and again, even when there is no cultural connection between the speakers. Historical records deepen the mystery. Ancient civilizations, separated by thousands of years and vast distances, recorded death-related experiences that mirror modern accounts. These descriptions existed long before modern medicine, media, or shared global narratives, suggesting that the phenomenon is not a recent cultural invention, but a recurring human experience. The emotional after-effects also show remarkable consistency. Regardless of culture, people who report these experiences often lose their fear of death, place greater value on compassion, and develop a stronger sense of purpose. These changes persist even when the experience conflicts with prior beliefs, indicating that they are not simply reinforcing existing worldviews. Cross-cultural research has also shown that individuals rarely report culturally expected punishments or rewards. Instead of structured heavens or hells defined by doctrine, people describe environments focused on awareness, connection, and understanding. This challenges the idea that religious teaching shapes the experience, as the reported realities often differ from doctrinal descriptions. Even among skeptics and those with no spiritual background, the same elements arise. Scientists, soldiers, pilots, and medical professionals, people trained to value empirical evidence, report the same sequence of experiences when confronted with death. Many struggle to explain what happened, precisely because it does not align with their prior beliefs. Another revealing detail is the absence of random or chaotic imagery. If these experiences were purely neurologic, greater variation would be expected, influenced by personal memories, fears, and desires. Instead, the repetition of core elements suggests an underlying structure that transcends individual psychology. The universality of these experiences points toward a shared human encounter with something fundamental. Culture appears to act as a lens rather than a creator, shaping how the experience is described but not its essential content. This distinction is critical, as it implies that the experience originates from a common source rather than being constructed independently by each culture. As reports continue to emerge from every corner of the world, the argument that these experiences are mere cultural artifacts grows weaker. The same story is being told in countless voices, across time, geography, age, and belief. When a phenomenon repeats itself with such consistency under such diverse conditions, it suggests that what is being encountered may be as real and universal as consciousness itself, operating beyond the boundaries of culture, belief, and expectation, revealing a continuity of awareness that does not belong to any single tradition, but to humanity as a whole. Modern medicine is built on the assumption that mental experience depends entirely on the physical brain. Damage the brain, and consciousness degrades. Shut the brain down, and awareness should disappear altogether. Yet certain documented phenomena repeatedly emerge in medical settings that do not fit within this framework, forcing researchers and clinicians to confront events that current neurological models cannot adequately explain. One of the most challenging examples is terminal lucidity. Patients with severe neurological disorders, advanced Alzheimer's disease, late-stage dementia, massive brain tumors, or extensive stroke damage sometimes experience a sudden return of mental clarity shortly before death. These individuals, who may have been unresponsive or cognitively absent for years, suddenly recognize loved ones, speak coherently, recall memories, and express emotions with full awareness. These moments are not gradual improvements, but abrupt shifts, occurring without any medical intervention or structural brain recovery. From a neurological standpoint, this should not be possible, as the brain damage remains unchanged. Medical professionals have documented numerous cases where terminal lucidity appears hours, minutes, or even seconds before death. The clarity often fades as quickly as it arrives, followed by death soon after. If consciousness were strictly generated by neural networks, a brain incapable of supporting awareness should not be able to suddenly produce it at the end of life. Yet this phenomenon has been observed frequently enough to be discussed in peer-reviewed medical literature. Another deeply troubling anomaly occurs during cardiac arrest. When the heart stops, blood flow to the brain ceases almost immediately. Within seconds, electrical activity collapses, and within minutes, irreversible brain damage begins. According to established science, conscious experience should be impossible during this window. However, many patients later report complex, structured experiences that they say occurred while they were clinically dead. These experiences are not vague sensations, but detailed narratives with sequence, memory, and meaning. What makes these reports particularly problematic for neuroscience is their timing. In many cases, the experiences are reported as occurring when brain function was either minimal or non-existent, confirmed by medical monitoring. Some patients accurately describe events that took place during resuscitation efforts, including conversations, procedures, and movements in the room. These descriptions are sometimes verified by doctors and nurses, raising serious questions about how perception and memory could form in the absence of functioning neural activity. Shared death experiences add another layer of complexity. In these cases, healthy individuals at the bedside of a dying person report witnessing elements of the dying person's experience. They may see light, feel a presence, or perceive the moment of separation as the dying person passes. These witnesses are not under anesthesia, not suffering brain trauma, and not near death themselves. Their experiences cannot be attributed to failing brain chemistry, yet they report phenomena similar to those described by near-death experiencers. Anesthesia awareness further complicates the picture. Under deep anesthesia, neural activity is intentionally suppressed to eliminate consciousness. Yet some patients report vivid experiences and accurate perceptions during procedures in which they were medically confirmed to be unconscious. While rare, these cases demonstrate that awareness can sometimes persist even when brain activity is pharmacologically minimized. Neuroscience often attempts to explain these events through residual brain activity or unconscious processing. However, these explanations fall short when the reported experiences include verifiable information obtained without sensory input. Memory formation itself requires specific brain processes, yet these memories persist clearly, sometimes for a lifetime, despite occurring during periods when those processes should be offline. Another unexplained phenomenon is the reported enhancement of cognition during these events. Instead of confusion, people describe heightened awareness, faster thinking, and a sense of expanded understanding. Time is often reported as irrelevant or absent, with experiences unfolding outside linear sequence. This stands in stark contrast to what is known about brain impairment, which typically leads to disorientation, slowed cognition, and fragmented perception. Brain imaging studies have mapped areas associated with perception, memory, emotion, and self-awareness, yet none explain why consciousness sometimes appears strongest when the brain is weakest. In cases of severe hypoxia, trauma, or degeneration, subjective experience should degrade. Instead, in these anomalous cases, awareness appears sharpened. Neurology also struggles to explain why these experiences are so consistent across patients. Brain-based hallucinations vary widely depending on individual history, trauma, medication, and pathology. The phenomena described during near-death states, terminal lucidity, and shared death experiences show a striking structural similarity that does not match typical neurological disorders. Another challenge arises from patients with severely compromised brains who still demonstrate meaningful awareness. There are documented cases of individuals with minimal brain tissue due to congenital conditions or extreme hydrocephalus, functi, owning cognitively far beyond what their brain scans would predict. While rare, these cases suggest that the relationship between brain structure and consciousness is not as straightforward as once believed. The dominant scientific model treats consciousness as an emergent property of matter, yet no physical explanation fully accounts for subjective experience itself. Neural activity can be correlated with experience, but correlation does not establish causation. This distinction becomes critical when awareness appears to persist without detectable neural support. Some researchers have proposed alternative models suggesting that the brain may act as a filter or modulator of consciousness rather than its generator. In this view, damage to the brain alters how consciousness is expressed, not whether it exists. When the filter weakens, as in near-death states, consciousness may manifest in less constrained forms, explaining the reports of clarity and expansion. Skeptics rightly demand caution, but dismissing these phenomena outright leaves major gaps in explanation. Medicine prides itself on following evidence wherever it leads, yet these events are often sidelined because they challenge existing paradigms. Ignoring anomalies does not resolve them, it merely delays understanding. Clinicians who witness these events firsthand often describe profound unease, not because the experiences are emotional, but because they contradict everything they were taught. Many report that observing terminal lucidity or hearing verified accounts of awareness during clinical death permanently altered their understanding of consciousness, even if they remain scientifically cautious. The ACC emulation of these documented phenomena suggests that the current neurological model may be incomplete rather than entirely wrong. Just as earlier scientific frameworks were expanded when they could no longer account for new data, the study of consciousness may be approaching a similar threshold where long-ignored evidence demands a broader understanding of awareness, one that does not collapse the moment the brain falters, one that appears capable of operating under conditions where matter alone should fail, leaving unanswered questions that medicine has not yet learned how to ask, let alone answer. The idea that human awareness might extend beyond a single lifetime has long been regarded as myth or belief rather than evidence-based inquiry. Yet when examined carefully, certain cases suggest continuity of identity and memory that cannot be easily explained by chance, imagination, or cultural influence. Among the most compelling of these are documented instances in which young children recall detailed memories of lives they have never lived, revealing patterns that challenge conventional understanding of personal identity and the finality of death. These cases often begin spontaneously. Children between the ages of 2 and 5 start speaking about people, places, and events unfamiliar to their families. They describe names, occupations, geographic locations, and relationships with surprising clarity. Unlike imaginative play, these narratives remain consistent over time and are often accompanied by strong emotional reactions, including longing, grief, or fear associated with specific events the child claims to remember. What elevates these accounts beyond anecdote is the level of verifiable detail. Investigators have documented thousands of cases in which the information provided by the child corresponds closely to the life of a deceased individual. In many instances, families have been able to locate a real person whose life history matches the child's statements with remarkable accuracy. The probability of such precise alignment occurring by coincidence alone is statistically low, particularly when multiple independent details are confirmed. Physical correlations add another layer of complexity. Some children are born with birthmarks or physical abnormalities that correspond to wounds or distinguishing features of the deceased individual they describe. Medical records and autopsy reports have sometimes confirmed that the injuries described by the child align with the location and nature of these marks. While genetics can explain many physical traits, it does not easily account for such specific correlations linked to another person's documented injuries. Cultural influence is often cited as an explanation, yet many of the strongest cases emerge from families that do not encourage or even accept the idea of reincarnation. In some instances, parents actively discourage the child from speaking about these memories, yet the details persist. In other cases, children grow up in cultures where reincarnation is not a dominant belief, reducing the likelihood that these memories are learned or socially reinforced. The emotional intensity of these memories is another notable feature. Children sometimes display phobias related to the manner of death they describe, such as fear of water, vehicles, or weapons. These fears often appear early, before the child has had any traumatic experience that could explain them. As the child grows older and the memories fade, these fears frequently diminish as well, suggesting a link between the remembered experiences and the emotional responses. Beyond childhood cases, adults who report spontaneous memories of other lifetimes describe them as distinct from imagination or fantasy. These memories often arise during moments of deep introspection, trauma, or altered states of consciousness. They carry a sense of familiarity rather than creativity, accompanied by emotional resonance that feels remembered rather than invented. Life reviews reported in near-death experiences also hint at continuity beyond a single lifetime. Individuals describe revisiting their actions and relationships with heightened awareness, sometimes accompanied by an understanding of unfinished themes or lessons. This sense of ongoing development suggests a process not confined to one physical existence, but part of a broader continuum of experience. The idea of continuity is further supported by the persistence of personality traits across experiences. Some individuals report recognizing recurring patterns in their lives, talents, interests, or emotional tendencies that feel carried forward rather than newly acquired. While environment and genetics shape personality, they do not fully explain why certain traits appear unusually strong or specific from an early age. Critics often argue that memory must be tied to the physical brain, and that when the brain dies, memory should vanish. Yet the existence of verifiable memories in children who have not yet developed complex cognitive structures challenges this assumption. If memory were entirely dependent on the current brain, access to information from another life should be impossible. Research into this area has attempted to apply rigorous standards, documenting cases before verification to avoid retroactive fitting. Investigators record the child's statements in advance, then compare them with historical records. This methodology reduces the risk of confirmation bias and strengthens the credibility of the findings. Skepticism remains essential, but it must address the data rather than dismiss it. Alternative explanations such as coincidence, cryptomnesia, or parental influence fail to account for the full range of features observed, particularly when families are unaware of the deceased individual prior to the child's statements. The implications of these cases are profound. If consciousness and memory can persist beyond physical death, identity may not be confined to a single body or lifespan. This challenges the notion that life is a closed loop with a definitive beginning and end, suggesting instead a process of continuity and transformation. Historical and cross-cultural records echo these findings. Many ancient traditions describe cycles of life, death, and rebirth not as belief systems, but as observed realities. While cultural narratives differ, the core idea of continuity remains consistent across civilizations separated by time and geography. Even when memories fade, their impact often remains. Children who once spoke vividly of previous lives sometimes retain emotional maturity or insight beyond their years, as if shaped by experiences that extend beyond early childhood. These traits persist even after conscious recall disappears. The scientific challenge lies not in proving belief, but in explaining evidence that does not fit existing models. The continuity suggested by these cases does not demand a specific doctrine, only an openness to the possibility that consciousness is not erased at death but carried forward in ways that science has not yet learned to measure. As more cases are documented with increasing rigor, the question shifts from whether such continuity is possible to how it might occur. The data suggests that awareness, memory, and identity may be more resilient than previously assumed, capable of surviving physical death and re-emerging in new forms, following patterns that hint at an ongoing journey rather than a single isolated existence. leaving behind a trail of evidence that challenges the finality of death and the limits of human understanding when people return from the brink of death. The most enduring evidence is not always found in what they describe seeing, but in who they become afterward. Across countless accounts, one pattern stands out with remarkable consistency. Individuals who report near-death or death-related experiences often undergo profound, lasting transformations that reshape their values, priorities, and understanding of life itself. These changes persist long after the experience has ended, suggesting that something deeply real and psychologically powerful has occurred. One of the most immediate and striking changes is the loss of fear surrounding death. People who once feared non-existence or punishment often describe death as a transition rather than an ending. This shift is not intellectual or philosophical, it is experiential. Why speak with quiet certainty rather than belief, saying they no longer fear death because they have already encountered it. This loss of fear remains stable even decades later and often endures through serious illness or hardship. Alongside the reduction in fear comes a dramatic reordering of priorities. Material success, social status, and external validation often lose their grip. Many individuals report a diminished attachment to money, competition, and superficial achievement. In their place emerges a focus on meaning, authenticity, and connection. Careers are changed, lifestyles simplified, and long-held ambitions reconsidered, not out of despair, but from a sense that previous goals no longer align with what truly matters. Empathy and compassion also increase markedly. People often describe feeling a deep sense of interconnectedness during their experience, as if the boundary between self and others dissolved. After returning, this awareness translates into everyday behavior. They become more patient, more forgiving, and more emotionally available. Acts of kindness feel less like obligations and more like natural expressions of understanding. This change is observed by family members and friends, even when the individual rarely speaks about the experience itself. Another common transformation is a heightened sense of purpose. Many individuals report feeling that their lives now carry a responsibility to reflect what they encountered. This does not necessarily manifest as religious devotion or preaching. Instead, it often appears as a quiet commitment to live with integrity, honesty, and care. People describe an internal guidance that influences decisions, urging them toward choices that align with compassion rather than fear. The emotional depth of these changes is difficult to overstate. Relationships often become more meaningful, even if they also become more challenging. Individuals may distance themselves from environments or connections that feel shallow or harmful. While this can create temporary tension, many report that their relationships ultimately become more authentic and fulfilling. Another consistent change is an increased appreciation for life itself. Ordinary moments, sunlight, conversation, nature, silence, are experienced with renewed intensity. People often say they feel more present, less distracted by trivial concerns. This heightened awareness is not manic or euphoric, but grounded, accompanied by a sense of gratitude that permeates daily existence. Interestingly, these transformations occur regardless of prior belief. Skeptics, atheists, and individuals with no spiritual background report the same enduring changes as those who were religious before their experience. In many cases, the experience challenges their previous worldview, yet the transformation remains, suggesting that the change is not driven by belief reinforcement but by direct encounter. Psychologists have studied these after-effects and found that they differ significantly from changes associated with trauma or hallucination. Traumatic experiences often result in fear, anxiety, and avoidance behaviors. Near-death-related transformations, by contrast, are characterized by reduced anxiety, increased emotional stability, and a greater sense of coherence. The changes are integrated rather than disruptive. Some individuals struggle initially to reintegrate into daily life. The contrast between what they experienced and ordinary reality can be disorienting. Feelings of frustration or sadness may arise, not from the experience itself, but from the difficulty of expressing it. Over time, however, most find ways to integrate the transformation, often through service, creativity, or quiet personal practice. A notable aspect of these changes is their resistance to reversal. Even under stress, loss, or illness, the core transformation remains intact. People may grieve, suffer, or fail like anyone else, but the underlying shift in perspective endures. This stability challenges the notion that the experience was a temporary psychological state. Family members often serve as unintended witnesses to these transformations. Spouses, children, and colleagues frequently report that the individual became more loving, less reactive, and more thoughtful after the event. These observations add an external layer of validation, confirming that the change is not merely subjective. Another unexpected outcome is a reduced fear of judgment and increased self-acceptance. People often describe learning that their worth is not measured by external success but by the quality of their actions and intentions. This realization leads to greater authenticity and less concern with social approval. These transformations also influence how individuals view suffering. While pain is not minimized or dismissed, it is often seen within a broader context. Many report a deeper capacity to endure hardship without losing hope, grounded in the sense that life has continuity and meaning beyond immediate circumstance. Importantly, these changes do not align with a single ideology. People do not return with identical beliefs or doctrines. Instead, they return with shared values, compassion, honesty, connection, and purpose. This universality suggests that the transformation arises from the nature of the experience itself rather than from cultural or religious interpretation. Over time, many individuals feel compelled to live in a way that reflects what they encountered, even if they never speak about it publicly. Their lives become the evidence. The consistency, depth, and permanence of these changes challenge the idea that near-death experiences are mere illusions. Psychological events rarely produce such sustained positive transformation without reinforcement or ideology. The lasting impact of these experiences points to something more than imagination or chemical reaction. They reshape identity at its core, altering how individuals perceive themselves, others, and reality. When an experience leaves behind not fear, confusion, or dependency, but clarity, compassion, and purpose that persist across decades, it raises a profound question about its origin, one that cannot be answered solely by examining the brain, but must also consider the possibility that the encounter touched something fundamental within human consciousness, something enduring, something that continues to quietly guide those who return, shaping lives in ways that words can never fully capture taken together. All 5 key themes form a single, unsettling picture. The idea that consciousness is fragile, temporary, and entirely produced by the brain no longer fits the evidence placed before us. Across medical SETI, NDEs, cultures, ages, and belief systems, the same patterns repeat with a consistency that demands attention. Awareness appears to continue when the brain should be silent. Experiences follow similar structures even among people who have never heard such stories. Documented medical phenomena defy neurological expectations. Memories and identity sometimes appear to survive death itself, and those who return are not unchanged. They are transformed in ways that are deep, lasting, and life-altering. What makes this body of evidence so powerful is not any single account, but the convergence of many independent lines of observation. When experiences align across science, medicine, psychology, history, and human behavior, dismissal becomes increasingly difficult. These phenomena do not rely on belief, faith, or doctrine. They emerge in skeptics and believers alike, often contradicting what the individual once believed about reality and death. The implications are profound. If consciousness is not created by the brain but expressed through it, then death may not be an erasure, but a transition. Identity may not end with the body, and meaning may extend beyond a single lifetime. This perspective reshapes how life is valued, how fear is understood, and how human connection is perceived. Rather than offering comfort alone, this evidence issues a challenge to rethink the nature of existence itself. It asks whether awareness is more fundamental than matter, whether life is part of a larger continuum, and whether death is not the opposite of life, but a doorway within it. And if even a fraction of this evidence is true, then death does not end the story. It changes where the story continues.